By the way, pronounce
Fair.
Maya's last name for me.
Angelo.
Angelo. Thank you.
I know it looks like Angelou, but it's Angelo.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Okay, that's me. Okay, some of my notes.
You're blue on purple.
Yeah, I put some in the wrong place because I was on the laptop and that was too hard. And
So I
oh,
corrected
you
that
moved them. Good, good.
and highlighted in the proper colors.
Yeah, I have so many things open, but I need them all. Um, Dealing with the church or no, the school vendors.
Ow! Ow!
Nobody's gonna get my lady.
Vendors I love.
Nobody living on this.
That was painful.
Okay,
That was painful.
okay.
That was painful.
Wasn't that loud to me? Okay.
That was painful.
Wasn't that loud to me? Okay.
That was painful.
Wasn't that loud to me? Okay. And all of our the echoing was that was our live stream live, so I know everything is working. Yay.
Yay! Look at us.
Yeah. I don't see any announcements or what we're about. We might not be able to even put those titles in. That might be a thing because
We're
it's
new.
so brand new.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I thought I did that on my channel that I could put like what I was doing, the title at least.
Yeah, no. Live now. I'm doing the Twitter.
Okay.
It's got the shares, so that's good. Facebook. Let's put it on. I got cords hanging in weird places.
There
No,
it is.
not Geek Grill.
I popped up on Twitter, so I'm going to now do that on my Twitter page. And let me pull up Facebook and see if I can see it on my Facebook page.
Yeah, it's just got the description of our page. Normally it would put in the title and everything. I may just have to fart around with it in Twitch. Because I was going to set us up in the new Twitch has its own tool, but
Right.
it's not very good. It's I didn't trust it enough, so what I did was I'm using Streamlabs for us, and I'll use that new tool for my page because I very rarely stream.
Right.
And then I'm gonna download software for this camera and try to get it going again. I might have to replace it, but we'll see. I think it's not getting along with my new computer. Because I got a fancy, super fast chip.
That can be the case sometimes. So I understand. So, all right, let me get out of here. All right, so I've shared on my Facebook. I've already did the Twitter thing,
Push that.
did TikTok. So, all right.
Yay.
We are at 7 o'clock.
Yep,
So
we're live. We're good to
let's
go. You're starting. I can just push the song. Ready?
go ahead.
Evil is amongst us. Stay back, boy. This calls for divine intervention. I kick ass for the Lord.
Here on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes and into your brother's face, your country, and simply say, very simply, with hope, good morning. Maya Angelou on the pulse of morning.
In every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country, our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge, battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there's always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. Amanda Gorman, The Hill We Climb, Let's talk about inaugurations, past and present.
Welcome to Heresy and Hearsay, a podcast to reclaim faith in the context of political discussion. I'm Reverend Barney, and you can follow me at Seth Roth II on Twitter, and you can follow the show at Heresy and Hearsay. Heresy and Hears One. Heresy and Hearsay has a Patreon site that you can find at patreon.com/heresy and hearsay, where you can visit and support us. Just $2 a month goes a long way to help us make this a humble show. You can also and also to help me today with this podcast is my co-host and the belle of every inaugural ball, September.
Hello, this is September, or 9 of 12, and you can follow me on Twitch or Twitter at 9 of 12. That's NINEOF12. I am also the co-host of the Geek Grills podcast. Welcome to our new Twitch channel, and you can contribute with bits here or subscribe for free if you have Amazon Prime. You can also subscribe with monies. You can follow the show on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and any podcast catcher. Just look for Heresy and Hearsay. So please like, share, follow, subscribe, tell your friends, send them all over to the new channel, and give us a review. Apple is a great way to do it. Other podcasters work too, and that helps others find us. We also have a website. You can listen to all of our past shows there and find bios about each of us. That's at heresyandhearsay.com.
So we know that there is the. Oh, by the way, happy second impeachment trial day, September. Happy, So we know there's an impeachment going on. We are not a breaking news thing. That's not something we're due, but we will cover that next week, just so it's known. Next week we will be doing a news catch-up, trying to round up some of the news that we may have missed over the past few weeks, because it's still being flying at us fast and fierce. So we're going to try to just kind of catch up so that we can then go forward with some ideas and some more thought-provoking stuff. But we do want to catch up with some news, because news is also part of this. Pardon me.
Of the trial?
I saw some of it. I saw some of it, but also I mostly read reports from reporters, and it just seems like, Trump's lawyers were legitimate lawyers. They weren't like certain lawyers he had, even Rudy Giuliani. Here's the thing. Rudy Giuliani, before he became mayor of New York, was a legitimately good prosecutor for the U.S. District of New York. So I don't understand what it is about when lawyers get around Trump, but it seems like their brains just melt into goo, because these lawyers were legitimate lawyers. One of them was the prosecutor was the AG of Pennsylvania, and the other one was
some
a
of them
decent
have defended Nazis and stuff in the past, though. This isn't. I don't know.
Right? No, well, I understand that, but they're competent lawyers, and they sounded like idiots. That's from the text that I read of some of the stuff they said, they really did not sound like they knew what they were doing as lawyers.
Yeah, and that's very sloppy.
And that's what I'm saying is like what it is about when you get into his orbit. Does it just suck the intelligence out of everybody who gets into his orbit? So yeah, I read some of it, and I'm just like,
you get penalties on all your int rolls.
Yeah, I'm just like, I don't get it. It's like, what is he, like a mind flayer or an intelligence devourer? For those who are D&D players, you know exactly what I mean. I'm just like, because it's just like these guys were competent lawyers that suddenly lost their competence, and I've noticed that.
Power lust. But anyway, we're going to talk about other stuff.
Yeah. So today, what we wanted to do is we were going to do this last week, but
things happen.
I've not been feeling well. So I'm, forgive
Neither
me.
have I.
So, yeah, so but we wanted to talk about inaugurations, past and present, and what we're going to do is we're going to go through the ones that we were most politically aware of to present. And for both of us, because this was the first one that I mentioned for myself, and September said the same thing, was the first one that we both recall was Bill Clinton's first inauguration back in '93. I remember I was still in high school at the time. I was a senior in high school. It was my senior year, and we watched it live. And it was interesting. I had never seen inauguration before, because before that it was Bush 1, and I don't think we watched it then. I don't know why we didn't when I was in junior high, but we watched this one, and I remember Maya Angelou. Sorry, I'm always going to mispronounce it because that's how I've heard it so long, and I
Honey, Amanda
apologize.
Gorman mispronounced it in an interview recently, and I was like, what? How do I know this and she doesn't know this? But
Well, she probably does. It's just that you've heard it mispronounced for so long
yeah, yeah.
that it's one of those things. So yeah, but and I remember talking to my mother about it, and it's like my mother didn't understand the poetry, and I'm like, "Oh, you're not a poetry person, Mom," but I understood it, so it meant so much to me, and that was, and we had discussed that was like the first time I ever really was introduced to her, and to find out that she had been teaching at Wake Forest for a decade beforehand, and she was a treasure here in North Carolina, and that I, being in North Carolina and being taught in North Carolina, had never heard her name before, and she had multiple published books, and that she was, a civil rights leader and stuff like that, and you don't hear about her until she's like on the dais. That that proves a whole nother kettle of fish, and we'll get to that
Well, I wonder how
later.
much of that is weirdly. I mean, it seems, I guess, to you that you should have heard of her because she's, from here. But I was not from here and did know who she was.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean, I guess I heard of her through. I was familiar with her work through friends of mine.
Right.
Mostly my girlfriend Tony, who I actually met in Florida, but then she was living in New York not long after this inauguration, but we knew each other in between, and I had heard of her in the 90s, but it was from my black friends, but they weren't Southern, so I don't know. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where that, and this is going to be a subject that we will definitely be tackling in the future. For those who follow our Twitter page, every night I post, because it's a Black History Month, I am posting famous Black history, people in Black history, and every Wednesday I am posting events in Black history that I think that we should have been taught. Last Wednesday, I talked about uh, the Black Wall Street massacre, and I haven't decided what tomorrow night's is going to be, but I'll be tomorrow afternoons is going to be. But
Okay, so
um,
there's probably some people, because we weren't really clear, wondering why we're talking about Maya Angelou.
yeah,
Because you didn't understand the poetry, or your mother didn't understand the poetry, but she read this poem that was quoted at the top of our show on the Pulse of Morning at the first Bill Clinton's first inauguration, which is the
right,
first inauguration we're talking about. And she was only the second poet in history to read a poem at a presidential inauguration. Robert Frost was the first inaugural poet, and he
mm-hmm.
spoke at the 1961 inauguration, and that was JFK.
Right,
So that was an interesting, I think, statement about, because I mean, that was as close as Clinton ever came to directly talking about race. He was well beloved across the aisles in our country, and had a good following of many colors, and inviting Maya to recite that poem at the inauguration was kind of it was the strongest statement he made, I suppose.
Yeah, because there used to be this joke before Barack Obama was elected that Bill Clinton was the first black president.
Which is
Uh, I know it's not true. I'm just saying there
I guess it
was
was
there.
funnier in the earlier '90s. I always thought it was a fucking weird thing to say, but okay. Like
Yeah,
it never quite
it's,
washed with me, but
especially when you look at some of his. Because if you listen to his speeches, and that's something we're going to talk about, and we will be putting links to all their speeches in our show notes.
mm-hmm.
Because I did some of them were a little harder to find than others. To be honest, the surprisingly the hardest one to find was actually Trump's speech. I had to go and do a lot of digging for Trump's speech. I wonder why. But anyways,
Because you don't tend to use things like archives for sources, honey. But that's
well, to find the full text, there was a lot of like snippets. Uh,
yeah.
it, and it was sort of hard. It was sort of hard to also do that for Biden's speech because we've gotten. It's kind of sad because if you look at like the earlier speeches, you can find them. You can find the speeches fairly easy. You type in text of the speech. But when you do that for the especially the last two, what you do is you find like you go to it's like most of the top you have to go through a couple of different Google searches, Google listings before you find them.
Just okay.
Maybe I didn't search. Maybe my Google flu is not as good as yours.
I wish you would have asked me because I would have just said go to the Library of Congress site and they will be there.
Well, now I know, and
Now you
this
know.
is
That's where you look for that sort of thing. But I'm the political nuts and bolts nerd, and I don't get my stuff from the same type of media sources. A lot of times I don't watch these speeches. I watched footage of Maya's poetry reading, but the rest of the Clinton speech I did not watch live. I tend to very often, unless I am for some reason in the heat of the moment, like on the campaigns I've worked on, I watch the inaugural speech because it's kind of a wrap up. But when didn't work on the campaign, I tend to go and other speeches like State of the Unions, I tend to go and read the text of them because I feel like I can get a clearer. I can know more clearly what was said instead of getting lost in my emotional reactions, if that makes sense.
Right. I tend to listen to the speech while reading the text at the same time. It helps me get it better, but that's how I learn anyways for the most part. That's just how I learn on certain things, especially if it's very dense. It just helps me a good deal with that. We both had a similar take on the 93, which is that it was basically on the 93 speech was basically a call to action and basically don't rely on the government so much.
Yeah, and him coming in when he did and being, still supposedly a Democrat, there were a lot of, to me, keyword Republican things. I mean, he was well known for working with Republicans prior to the time he got elected and then until they, overcame his majority he had in Congress. But, like, I was interested to look back at this speech and see him using those kind of things. I love that he said technology is almost magical and mentioned communications in his first speech because the Telecommunications Act he helped pass early on was actually very, very good for me and for a lot of people I know, like people, unskilled workers supposedly, but we all knew how to use computers, so we could, not just work as baristas. They were all of a sudden, it broke up in Ma Bell, and I was able to get jobs in the telecommunication industry. So that was something I really loved that he did, and I think it's interesting that it was in his speech.
Mhm.
But I was tweaked reading it again about that relying less on government, which is so buzzwordy, and I had a lot of problems during his administration because I became pregnant. I was a single mother. I lost my job, and I was trying to climb out of the hole of being on welfare. And he kept slashing and hacking at programs that would have helped me.
Oh,
Cut
and that is
daycare. You
huge,
couldn't get daycare
especially.
help
I'm
if you were
sorry.
going to school. You could only get it for going to work. And then if you were going to go to school, it could only be for certain things. And then there were only certain jobs. And it, and it, it was very, very difficult time in my life. And it's only by the grace of some other, people and help I got that I could get out at all. I mean, the daycare thing was a nightmare. Like I had a job and I couldn't go because I couldn't get the daycare assistant until after I had the job for a week or two. And then if once I got a job, once you were making over, if you got up over to $10 an hour, you had to pay anything else you made back into your own daycare expenses. So
Hmm.
it was very difficult. Like I enrolled and unenrolled and trying to get back into college and training programs that the Clinton administration was supposedly putting all this money into would take place at night, but there was no daycare, so there wasn't really any way to access it.
Right.
There was a lot of actions that were not taken. Like they didn't put the money where their mouth was there, and I was living through it and had voted for him. So
And that is especially true if you read through the 97 speech, where he talks about how many people, how many record no, and I did some quoting on this about record number of our fellow citizens have moved from welfare to work.
yeah, that whole welfare to work thing was very poorly executed.
Yeah.
And they started pulling their numbers from people that were no longer on the rolls, but it's because they were not necessarily working. They were ineligible for the programs. So, yeah.
Right. And
That's some
and
really
and
ugly
it,
playing with numbers that I was living through and hearing in
right.
97.
And the thing is that this is also when Clinton started changing the how they calculated the unemployment rates
Yep.
to where they didn't count the underemployed,
Mm-hmm.
because you could be off of the books on the welfare or whatever, but you would be like working two or three part-time jobs, and because that's not a full-time job and whatever the case may be, you're still technically underworking, and
And the
and
same thing
that's
as it's the same as when you fall off, you run out of unemployment because you don't get
right.
it forever. And I was being reminded, by 97, I was being reminded, hearing those words of, that's what happened to my mother. That's why I was, one of the reasons that Reagan was such a nightmare. Like she ran out of unemployment, she ran out of sub pay, so she didn't even count as unemployed. And they put me to work at 14 in a hospital laundry, and
Hmm.
that was their solution, so economically it was putting money back in so all these numbers look good and it doesn't look like my mom's unemployed. Meanwhile, she's laid off from GM for that long.
Hmm.
But, oh no, employment's getting better. And yeah, I was becoming very disillusioned with Clinton by the end of his term. I honestly, one of the biggest reasons I was for Hillary so many years later was she did more. I feel like she did more than he did in some ways because they started a lot of the healthcare stuff back then that did
Yeah.
actually help me. People hated and they bitched about the one building. Oh, what do you call it? When they collated all the doctors and they put them in one place, and oh, what do they call them? Shoot. But basically, it was this. Everybody was freaking out like, oh, the government's in our healthcare, but it was just consolidating healthcare things. And it made it so much more accessible. Like they had a building in downtown Buffalo that I could get to by bus with
Right.
my baby, and I could see my doctor, and I could see the pediatrician, and there was a pharmacy, and there was a lab in one building, and
Right.
it and Medicaid paid for it.
I remember when I was first supposedly when I was diagnosed with diabetes, I had no job at the time. I was, whatever. And I would go to our health department and there was the lab, there was the doctor, everything else. There was and I would pay small amounts for my medical stuff, and everything else. And that would be it.
Hmm.
For it would be, I would have to come up with a little bit of money, but I wasn't working at the time, but it wasn't hard to come up with a couple of bucks to pay and it literally was a couple of bucks. So at least there was that for me. And I wasn't on welfare or anything like that, but at the time, um, so I was lucky as far as that concerned. He, Clinton's one of the things I wanted to also focus on is the fact that what their presidencies, what they will be remembered for, and I don't want to focus on like the scandals and stuff, but for Clinton, I think the two big things is that how he gutted the welfare system, but also the crime bill and how he dealt with the crime bill and crime and really just made it really tough as far as the crime bill
Hmm.
and everything else, and what that kind of really set things back, especially in race relations and especially how the police handled certain crimes and everything else, and how it made it much worse. And I honestly say, and I want to read this quote because this did not age well. Our rich texture of racial, religious, and political diversity will be a godsend in the 21st century. Great rewards will come to those who can live together, learn together, work together, and forge new ties that bind together. I was like, well, that didn't age well because that didn't happen in the 21st century. Like, I think we could be better if we actually work together, but our rich diversity, I think, has made it worse. Has made it worse in some respect, and I think that didn't age well. But yeah, that crime bill, really did a lot of harm,
Hmm.
especially in poor black neighborhoods,
Hmm.
because of what it focused on,
Yeah.
and we are still reaping that. So let's move to the Bush administration and their first two.
Okay.
Um,
I wanted to. There was a quote from his speech that stood out to me that I wanted to mention that was surprising to me
okay.
before we move on from the 97, where Clinton said, America stands alone as the world's indispensable nation. That
Yeah.
upset me. That was uncharacteristically nationalistic, although there was stuff in his other speech about how we needed to have our might. Uh, Having a military that was basically just unquestionably the most powerful as a deterrent type talk, which yeah, agree
It's
with.
honestly, when you step back and the haze of the moments go away, and you look back at this, you realize that the Clinton administration, or at least the speeches, those two, were extremely very hawkish and very nationalistic. You had pointed that
Yeah,
out in our notes.
yeah, and I mean, he was hoping change, but it was. I mean, he was talking to a lot of young people came out to vote for him too, and
Hmm.
we had. I mean, we were Gen Xers, and we just lived through the Cold War, so non-proliferation was still like a new idea. It was
Right.
we still kind of had a Cold War mentality, so I understand in that context.
Yeah, that's true. That was my first election that I got was legal to vote, and that's when I voted, was that election.
Hmm.
So Yeah, and I did vote in that election, and I was strong in that election. So, and I've not missed an election since. So, but in the I will say this: I remember, and I also want to step back from this. We remember, at least I do, how much we picked on Bush about his lack of eloquence in his speeches. And now that I've lived through an entire other I'm just like Bush was the fucking bard next to Trump. I just wanted to say that now. Just like, but it's interesting when you look at his speeches, because when I looked at your notes for the 2005, I'm like, you know what? I need to reread it. Maybe you know, maybe I misinterpreted it. So, but in the 2001 speech, there was a lot of unity, and especially in a tough election, and there was a lot of talk of hope in there. There was a lot of talk of rebuilding our education, a lot of talk about immigration and how important immigrants were.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly think if 9/11 had not happened, those would have been what he would have focused on, especially immigration. He really wanted to fix immigration. I know that was a big thing even during the middle of the wars.
Okay, so you've
He
moved
was
on to talking about the 2005 speech.
Well, that I haven't gotten to that point, but what I'm just saying his overall platform between his two terms, he really wanted to do something about the immigration. And I think that would have been something he would have pushed really hard if 9/11 hadn't happened. And I just wanted to say that sometimes events happen that changes stuff. But I think that was what he was calling for, is to fix the immigration system.
There's a lot.
He
Yeah, there is
Go
a
ahead.
lot of that in there. There's a lot of looking back at W. I mean, in the time, it was. I was very frustrated. I was, marching against the wars, and um, his ineloquence, because of what we're used to from presidents, was different. And that regular guy, I want a beer with him thing was something that we could look at, with some disdain. Like, is that what we really, really want in a leader? However, his and we've seen it since he's not president anymore, more and more. He was not unreasonable. He is very average Joe, but he's got a he's one of those he's got a good heart.
Hmm.
Cheney is Vader. I mean, I believe he was a figurehead in many ways.
Right.
His speech actually is very accessible in
Hmm.
language to, all people. And yeah, he talks a lot about immigration, and I mean, being mostly a Texan, not completely genuinely a Texan, but I mean, he is a fluent Spanish speaker, and these are people he has, worked alongside, and I think it really meant something to him to make those, but he could never make those moves because everyone started running scared.
Yeah,
But he was,
especially after
his
the
Bible
whole.
stuff, that whole Good Samaritan stuff that he holds up
Mhm.
as an example, morally for him. I think he believes that, and given the opportunity, may have acted on it more. I mean, of course, most of his policies I did not agree with, but so many of his policies were just the result of what happened through his administration.
Right, and what happened as far as a reaction to 9/11, and I think if that had not happened, if there had been a not 9/11, I think it would have been. I don't want to say unremarkable, but I don't think it would have been nearly as derisive as we see it, as we look back on it now.
Yeah.
I think the wars really clouded a lot of stuff he wanted to do. Would he have been more of a financial hawk? Probably, but no more worse than what we just came out of. To be perfectly honest, with Clinton, because we're looking at this and we're looking at this with honesty, Clinton was a deficit hawk. He talked about the deficit Clinton talked about the deficit in his 97 speech. So yeah, it was one of those things where it's interesting, because he did talk about a lot more compassion. And you mentioned the fact that he was calling Mother Teresa a saint, even though she hadn't been canonized yet. That was something you had brought up in your little
Yeah,
notes.
because I mean, I remember at the time, I had been brought up Catholic, so I was very aware of what was going on around that, and people being, waiting and wanting that even before she passed. But the other thing about the 2001 speech that kind of struck me, and then I started in the following ones making notes about it, in in Obama's, and I started looking through all the speeches, is the graciousness of the way he opened his speech.
Right.
Like he literally addressed President Clinton first, his predecessor, calling him president. Distinguished guests, fellow citizens, and it started like I started looking to see the pattern, because it just the graciousness of that struck me, because it's everybody thinks everyone like remembers it as all these speeches begin with "my fellow Americans," right? But no, each of these speeches addresses different people in different orders. Sometimes they omit people. Sometimes they address people who are not normally acknowledged. Sometimes, and it's behaviorally interesting to me to look back, and I looked at all of these speeches we examined to say, a couple of them start with Justice Roberts because that's the one that just were in.
Right.
But just sometimes it was very, I'll say W was very, very gracious with that. Obama didn't address his predecessor directly at all, only the American people. In his first one and his second one, he did address his own VP and like his allies, and like the House leaders. Trump went addressed Roberts first, and then a list of presidents. So I assume it was all the living presidents that were present, if my memory
Right.
serves. And then the world, right? But we'll get into his speech later. But it's very interesting. I think there's something about the opening greeting,
Right.
that really gives you the flavor of each of these administrations and where they were headed and what they were about.
Well, it was very interesting in Bush's first speech how he even thanked VP Gore for a spirited. Let me see if I get it right. A spirited campaign and a gracious conceit, or but basically he was,
because that was certainly a mess.
yeah,
That could have gone on for much, much longer, and
right.
would it have been worth having President Gore and President Bush? Well, we have no way of knowing that, but I mean, I'd like to think so, but I'm not that partisan fool. And yeah, because him conceding saved. I mean, it was a huge stress on the country. The very idea of having the Supreme Court deciding that. Ugh. Sorry.
Yeah.
Horror.
No. Yeah.
He
for us
Mother
who lived through that, that was a lot of stress and a lot of terror and a lot of just, yeah. I didn't think we would ever have to live through that again.
Yeah. But he quoted Mother Teresa. He called her like a saint from our times. But she wasn't canonized until 2 years later.
Yeah.
And I feel like he was kind of trying to use his political prowess to push that along, because there were people resisting that.
Was it Benedict that was Pope at that time? I think it was.
No, not yet.
No, okay. It was still Paul at the time?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, okay.
But
I'm not Catholic, so.
Yeah. But yeah, W's language was so inclusive and empathetic where Clinton was a great speaker. Everybody always said he was a great speaker, and he also kind of had that good old boy Bubba quality. They just call him Bubba, right?
Yeah.
And but Clinton still settled. He suffered from Democrat-itis, where we over-explain and dig into all this policy and never say what like people want to hear. And
Right.
W was much better at just kind of boiling it down to plain speak. And that comes through in reading these speeches.
Yeah, it does. Now, initially I had written that there was a lot of war talk in this 2005 speech. I reread it because I read your note and like, maybe I need to reread it. Maybe I got something. And there's not a lot. There's more of nation building and nation support than actual war talk. And I mean, we were still in the middle of the war, but there was a lot of supporting nations and helping them build democracies.
Right, and
And
he was
and that
the wars were pretty unpopular, and that's I was surprised to see your note. For those of you, I mean Barney's not his original note's like war is great, war is good, let's have more war. And I'm like, well, that's not what I got. 'Cause to me, I mean, he's already surprisingly addressing, okay, we need to support growth so they can stand on their own, which is something that I don't remember hearing a lot about until I'm literally getting a call from Clinton, North Carolina right now. I'm going to decline that call. It should not be coming through. I apologize for my confusion, but it is. But it was from Clinton, North Carolina. My heart just went boom, boom, boom when I saw Clinton. Oh,
they found you.
shit.
They have found you.
But the war wasn't popular, and yeah, I mean that he was already talking about like getting them on their own in his inaugural speech.
Yeah.
Was surprising for me to see, given the policies of that administration in that time. They were nowhere near. They were like using Afghanistan to go into Iraq, using 9/11 to go into Iraq, and like I feel like they put W out there to put a face on it and calm everyone down. Reading this,
Yeah. I think that was the case, and I think here's the thing: Bush wanted to do good, and I also think Bush had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder about Iraq because of how Saddam Hussein kind of mocked his father. And it's not just a Southern thing, it's anybody's thing. When someone, says something bad about your father, you want to step up and say, it's like, well, step out here, let's have a discussion outside, kind of thing. It's one of those things. It gets your feathers a little ruffled. He had a little chip on his shoulder, and I think Cheney and the others exploited that. He had bad advice, but bad people who were looking out for their own interest. Cheney had a lot of money in the military industrial complex, and a lot of other people did too. And war needed to happen so that they could make more money. And again, we can look back on this and yeah, Bush was ultimately the person who made the final decision, but I honestly think that he was just so overwhelmed by all these people in his ear that he thought it was a good idea. And I'm not saying he was completely hapless. He was not. He's a very intelligent man. But on the same thing, when you have people that you trust, people that your father trusted in your ear saying, you should do this, you should do this.
Well, and I mean, it wasn't just him. I mean, all the Congress and Senate to deal with. The president
Yeah.
isn't the end-all, be-all of all of these things, but...
But so it just it kind of snowballed on him, and we can look back and be like, be a little softer. Not a whole lot. There was still a lot of crap, don't get me wrong, but
yeah, I had to go back to like an interesting thing about how that was addressed is that opening sentence. In 2005, W literally addressed Vice President Cheney first before the Chief Justice who just swore him in. Like, That is one of those like, wow, is that another clue to that mindset? Like he literally,
Yeah.
Vice President Clinton, Mr. Chief Justice, President Carter, President Bush, President Clinton, Reverend clergy, distinguished guest, fellow citizens, and
Yeah.
then goes to his speech. Like anybody who thinks Cheney wasn't in charge,
Yeah.
that seems really interesting to me. Like what speechwriter decided we're gonna address the VP first? In the inaugural speech? I mean, that one's a little weird.
Yeah. I
No one
agree.
else does that. Anyway.
So Obama's first speech was interesting. It was talking about rebuilding after, especially he was elected during the
Great
biggest
Recession.
recession that had ever happened, the housing bubble that happened, the housing crash, and all of that stuff. So a lot of that speech was about rebuilding that and everything else. He didn't lay blame on anybody's feet per se. He also he didn't name names, but they were sitting on the dais, so you didn't have to. But you know, it was one of those things where it's like, you know, we're going to fix this. It's going to take time. It's not going, and that's one of the things that he said is it's not going to take time. I noticed his speeches were the longest, were next to Joe's at the, which we'll get to at the end, were the longest speeches.
I don't
No,
know that I agree with that by words, but I mean, in general, he's a long speaker. I did notice that second addresses tend to be much longer than first addresses.
right,
I did note that he opened his speech with his primary greeting was simply to, my fellow citizens. However,
right.
his second sentence was thanking President Bush for his service and his generosity and cooperation that he's shown through the transition. I just wanted to say that out loud because there's going to
Yeah,
be more talk about that.
yeah. We'll
But yeah,
get to
he had
that.
just been handed that huge economic crisis, like I said, and he held to his anti-war stance. He did run against the wars, and he held to that in the inaugural speech, which is nice. There was just so much going on at the time, and I feel like it was almost a missed opportunity to point out like the huge world-shattering win of us finally electing a person of color in America, but there was a crisis, and he had to, stand up to that, and he had to calm down the world because with our economy collapsing and so much else in the world depending on that, arguably he'd already given his race speech. The I have copies of that one that I love. I could put a link to that in notes on our show
Okay.
if you want me to, Bernie. But the We the People speech kind of turned the tide in that race for him. So him
Is it,
getting up and grandstanding about it at the inauguration was perhaps inappropriate, especially in the crisis he was in.
was that the one that was turned into the song by Will I Am?
Yes.
Yeah.
They
Okay.
put the
Yeah.
Yes We Can in it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember. I don't know how many times I watched that song on YouTube with all of the Hollywood actors and singers and stuff saying the speech in this rhythm and everything, and how powerful it was.
Yeah.
It was. I mean, it ignited a lot of people. You want to talk about someone who was able to get the youth vote out and get this coalition of people out to vote for him. That was someone that just was just phenomenal at
Have
doing
you
that.
have you heard the one they did with the Joe Biden speech he made about Charlestown?
I have not.
Oh, good God, sweetie, I cry every time I hear it. I
I'll have to
weep.
look that one up.
Yeah. But anyway, it's the same kind of thing, and they're actually singing lines from his speech, and I just bawl. Um, yeah, he picked up some good stuff from his buddy.
Yeah. I know.
So I
The
was
two.
watching this one for sure, but I wasn't watching it. I should probably mention that. I was invited to this inauguration in 2009. And I went, but the crowds, the historically gigantic crowds, actually historically gigantic, not I'm making this up with big words, sorry, were kind of, they couldn't keep the flow through to get people securely from one location to another, and the security was super high for getting through gates and stuff with your tickets. And I was in the silver section, supposed to
Right.
be, and just the crowds were so overwhelming on the mall that they had to close one of the gates, and there was no way for us, my friend Scott and I, my gay husband, he was part of the we were invited as being like basically super volunteers, which is another cool thing that administration did, empowering people. And there was no way we were going to, in time, in the freezing cold and snow, get from the one side of the mall to the other, where there was a gate, another gate to get to where our seats were. So we gave up. We did have tickets. Also, we were invited to the neighborhood ball. There's usually a lot of balls around inaugurations, and they're very expensive and everything. But the Obamas instituted something, and I don't know. I doubt. Oh, I'm sure Trump didn't do it. Why did I even ask? They started a brand new ball. They called it the neighborhood ball. It was, the tickets weren't, hundreds of dollars or anything, and they invited volunteers from around the country. Scott was actually the one that got invited to that. Excuse me, having done some statewide work for LGBT for Obama,
Right.
and I was his plus one. And we decided, all right, if we're going to make it to this ball, there's no way we're going to do that if we even can get to where our seats are for the inauguration. So we went back to the subway, and we were staying at another volunteer's house who offered us kindly just a place to crash. And we watched it. There's a mall near it's Silver City Station, I think it's called. It's somewhere
Okay.
near the Pentagon. And there's like a mall in the subway station. And we, in a mall bar, had dinner and watched the inauguration on the TV there. And I've got like phone footage of us doing that. And then I got my hair put up in the mall, and we went back to the house and got all dressed up and went back into DC to go to that ball. And it was a fantastic affair. There were acrobats doing that stuff from the ceiling, hanging like Cirque du Soleil. I was standing a few feet from Beyonce singing. What was the song? Finally. Oh no, what was the song? At Last. Sorry, she sang "At Last" to open it as Barack and Michelle came out, and Barack and Michelle. It was the first ball they made an appearance at as well. Was that one?
Oh, nice.
One Tears. And Michelle wore that now very famous dress by this designer nobody ever heard of, to give him props. And then like John Legend was there, and Stevie Wonder was there. I mean, it was a no holds barred affair. Like, I feel like it was definitely the most fun ball that I wouldn't have wanted to gone to some kind of black tie snobby expensive thing, right? Like, but they did this for the on the ground people who just gave so much of their own time and treasure to make it happen. So yeah, that's where I was that day.
I was not. I've only been to DC once, and that was for the rally to restore sanity and or fear.
I've only been there a couple times.
Yeah.
I went to march with my mom and my sister against the Iraq War. And then the next time I was there was for the inauguration of Obama. And then I think the next time was like on a field trip with my son. Then I finally got to see stuff. Because every other time, I'd get there on a Saturday, and then Sunday everything's closed. So I never saw any of the actual museums or anything until like 2 years ago when I went with my son. Played a lot of Pokemon Go.
One day I will take a trip to DC and actually visit some of the museums and stuff. I have not done that because the rally was on a Saturday, and then Sunday me and my friend Mary Shannon flew back, and that city corrupts you. I've never been so drunk in my entire life. Never been so drunk
Whatever.
in my life. That's a whole nother. They did a bit on what was it? It was the Daily Show. They did a bit how they sent somebody there for a week. And it was like after the first night, he was like partying and doing all of this stuff, and I'm just like, yeah, that's pretty much how it is. After the first day, you're just corrupted by the city.
I would not be. It didn't happen to me.
So the 2013. Let's get back.
Yeah, back on track. Sorry.
That's
Oh, no,
okay.
it's a
No,
story worth telling. I was there.
yeah. The 2013 was basically, hey, thanks for reelecting me. We're trying really hard to get this all done. I know the healthcare thing was not, didn't launch quite like we'd hoped, but we're working on it. We'll get it there. And I'm sure I thought that the GOP would actually help, but yeah, white people, what are we going to do? Right? Am I right? Yeah. That's basically how I felt the speech kind of came off. Not so, he did it much more eloquently, but that's just kind of how I felt it came off.
I felt like he finally got the chance to stand up and to go ahead and address some things. I mean, quotes like "through blood drawn by lash and blood drawn by sword, we learned that no union founded on principles of liberty and equality could survive a half slave and half free." I mean, he went there again with that kind of things and tried to push us to pass more of his agenda, like trying to push the public opinion by going from that to we decided, we did the railroads and we know the free market it only works a certain way and we have to care for the vulnerable and, trying to get people out of the way, kind of the same way Clinton was begging Congress to believe in it, to help him out and support him in some of his second inaugural. But yeah, a lot of things didn't go. But he was, we've outgrown a lot of these programs. We need to get more done. And I think, just like Clinton's, it was a lot of trying to push through. This is your last term. Push through this agenda. And so he mentioned things like sustainable energy, like actual policy things in the speech that he didn't so much in the first one, because the first one is more of a, celebratory fest usually than a laying out some policy and here's what I'm trying to do that the second one seemed to do. And he kind of followed that form, and it was very long compared to the previous.
Yes. But it was very policy heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And it echoed what he really wanted to do and everything else. And it's I think it's important.
The second speech is just like the last State of the Union. They tend to be much longer because they're the legacy ones.
Right. This is what I want to do with my legacy, and then the last State of the Union, this is what I've done with my legacy.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, Trump. I first was going to listen and read, and then I was like, oh, God, my ears are... Why is he... Oh, Jesus, I can't take his voice anymore. Please, God, no. So I turned his... And then tried to read it, and then my eyes started bleeding. So forgive me if... I got a lot of... I don't know if it's me, and it's still fresh in my brain, because, like I said, we've kind of been able to step back from Bush and be like, we can be a little softer on Bush now. And Trump is really still we're still dealing with him even now. It's still a very raw place. But
I don't think any of this is going to be anywhere near that forgivable because he wasn't as gracious in I
It
mean,
just seemed very. It seemed very whiny. It seemed very blame everybody else. It just, there's all these problems, even though the economy was doing well at the time. We weren't any major wars at the time. We weren't, we were getting out of Afghanistan. We were getting out of Iraq. We weren't we were doing fairly well as far as terrorism was concerned. You know,
there's a lot of things in this speech that, looking back at it, I was again alarmed to why didn't even I notice immediately, as much as I even disliked him from a long, long time ago, recognize how much he spoke in Newspeak.
Mhm.
That cult that he's developed is purposeful language that is in there from the very beginning, starting with, I mean, not just blaming, but that pitting one against the other. And he's doing it with like, okay, so all these other politicians are not here for you, but I'm here for you. And politicians are all rich and prospering, and they closed your factories, and I'm here for you. And they're buying this from this fake rich person.
Right.
And this is your country and it doesn't matter, and just this anti-government, anti-establishment, it's just about me, narcissistic stuff, right from the top of his first inaugural speech. And that, people call it a populist tone, but this is even more dangerous. And then he goes into fear, straight into fear mongering, and then the middle class needs to be restored. But I mean, everyone says that, but he actually proceeded to immediately gut the middle class, and the things he's saying, he was completely xenophobic, blaming it on foreign aid, and that's why they don't have your job here anymore, and I'm only going to hire American people, and our lax borders, and they're taking our jobs, that kind of xenophobic bullshit. That's not why our
Right.
middle class is diminishing. Our middle class is diminishing because of lack of protections, because of union busting, because of any number of stuff. And then he went straight into this America First, which is dog whistling. And all of that is in his first inaugural address.
Hmm.
Racist,
I know.
xenophobic, dog whistling, and how'd that trade war work out? We are worse off now. Anyone who doesn't believe that needs to do some more reading. It's just the truth. It failed. Anyway.
No, I agree. It was a lot of dog whistling, and there was an article not too long ago, and something I want to bring up, and I will do my best to find it or bring or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
there was, and I think we've brought this up once before, but the America First thing was used in the early 1930s here in America as kind of a pro-Nazi rhetoric for Americans. And Dr. Seuss did before he became who we know as Dr. Seuss, did a lot of political cartoons about how the America First crowd was Nazi sympathizers. And so that America First thing is a very fascist term that is a dog whistle for that kind of thought process. And it's
It
just,
was
it's,
it was used when I think it was Woodrow Wilson first. It
mhm.
was it was our declaring neutrality in World War II. It was the
Right. It
excuse
was
to stay out.
isolationism.
Yeah, it was isolationist. Not pro-Nazi, but it was isolationist for sure.
Right,
And
but
nationalist.
when Dr. Seuss was doing those comics, it was used at that point as a very pro. It was used as a kind of a
Well, it
pro
was
Nazi
calling out
thing.
those people that were not standing up for what they should. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it is a very isolationistic. I remember hearing I don't think I heard the speech. I think I read it back then because it was like I was disgusted at our nation for electing him the first time. So it's like,
Mm.
and it was just very, very interesting to read and just to see a lot of that, like you said, the xenophobic. It was very, and it still is. I mean, you just look at it now. It is not a unifying speech. All the other speeches we've talked about, after the election is over, bringing the nation together as a nation. That yes, we had a spirited, contest, but we are still one nation, and that we need to work as a nation. And this was very
Oh no, he came
dividing.
in with like, make your America great again. Everybody else is wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and very divisive and very putting people into camps, and that's what his presidency did. Is just separating us more and more at that point. So
People
I
love
think
it.
at least he did what he wanted to do as far as that's concerned. He didn't do anything else, but
People love it.
at least
People love it.
yeah.
Just saying what it
I,
feels.
so we're down to our most current president, who has been in office for just under 3 weeks now, and this is what I wrote. This is what I initially wrote, as far as like, what the hell? I go away for 4 years, and what the hell did you do to this country? Joe. I think Joe did a very good job with what he was saying. Um, he he does believe, and he always has believed in um, trying to unify the country and trying to work on both sides. He's, because he's from the old school, back when he was representative and then a senator, where you could work with the other side, and he does believe in that. And it's funny he didn't. Of course he mentioned Vice President Pence. He didn't talk about the graciousness and the transfer of power because Trump wasn't there. you know he
Yeah,
you know
it was I think he really pulled off the ultimate, like, don't make me come down there, like, because that's what happened. Charleston happened, and he was like, shit. And Jill, we've heard this story. Jill looked at him and was like, you kind of have to. Like, Biden didn't get in this race because he wanted power. He didn't want to come out of retirement. He had to fix it. It was just,
yeah.
the country is at his heart, and it has been for so long. And
You mean Charlottesville? You're talking about Charlottesville?
yeah, sorry, yeah. I always say the
Yeah.
wrong one because I'm so used to saying the other, because I have family there. Yeah, when Charlottesville happened, I mean, that's what prompted him to run. And the way he addressed in the public in his speech was Roberts, Harris, Pelosi, Schumer, McConnell, Pence, guest Americans. I love that after Chief Justice Roberts, he Vice President Harris. Like, he is so proud of getting her in there.
Yeah.
I love it. And then, the heads of the House and Senate, including, on both sides, and Pence, who was gracious enough to fucking show up, and the guests, and he opened up, call, calling out, like, I feel like 45 and his cult as being like, we've been through, they've been a crucible, and it's been dangerous and violent threat to our very process. The beginning of his speech is very, very boldly talking about what has been going on in the Capitol, because there had just been a fucking attempted insurrection. He thanks his predecessors from both parties for being there, which, like, specifically says, well, all these presidents from both parties, like, it's just throwing more shade at 45, and good, he deserved it, being a big
Yeah.
fat baby, not even showing up. And then he went at the pandemic. He went into policy the way I've not seen in any of these speeches. Direct policy initiatives being gone after in the first inaugural. Now, he's not getting, and it was long, but he's not getting a second inaugural.
You don't think he's going to rerun in
No.
2024?
He has said he will not. I believe him.
Okay.
But he went at the pandemic, and then the economy, and then racial injustice, and then climate change, and then called out by name white supremacy and domestic terrorism right off the bat. This is Uncle Joe. Gives me hope, because we had a lot of young people on. I worked on this campaign as well. I was working with a lot of really young people who come off other campaigns, off Bernie campaigns, off Warren campaigns, off Buttigieg campaigns, off just all these young folks, we need more young politicians, but all these young people working for them are like, all right. I mean, I guess Joe could be okay if they let him, but they haven't been around long enough to actually see Joe being like, Joe is, he's not a fucks to give. I mean, his gaffes, people call it gaffes. I mean, some of us tagging him in gas back during the Obama administration was like him getting caught on the microphone when they passed the Affordable Care Act, going, "Oh, this is a big fucking deal, man." Like, that's not a gaffe.
Yeah.
That's just being real. That's just Uncle Joe.
Right. Well, it's like it's like when Kamala Harris, after she'd given the oath of office, and it's like, you could hear Joe above everybody else going, hell yeah, going, yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Like, he was just, I think honestly, with the fact I made this joke earlier in another broadcast, and I'll say it again. Of course, the first time we have a woman as a vice president, she has to do double duty, as she also has to break ties and votes and stuff like that. So she of course has to do two jobs. So, but other than that,
but he did do the call to unity that you said marked all of the other inaugurals at the beginning. And to me, the speech was written very much, he brought an empathetic tone and his own self into it, which the campaign very purposely taught us to talk about empathy and compassion. Like, those were how we needed to be working. And if we weren't working with empathy and compassion, we shouldn't be on the campaign. I mean, they were serious. And I believe, that's the guy he is. Like, take a measure of me in my heart. That was his call to people who did not disagree with him during his speech. And I hope they do. I haven't seen a lot of it. I've been seeing live stream commenters being just awful, conspiracy, nasty, terrible at him. But I hope there are people who are listening, who are like, all right, hey man, like, he's a good guy. He's not evil. Stop with the weird pedo sniffing jokes. It's getting on my nerves. Can you just take an actual measure of this man and his service and his heart and his faith and his hard work?
Yeah.
That line in that speech, take a measure of me in my heart, that plea reminded me of a voter I talked to on the phone. It was like this guy, and he was like 83, if I remember correctly, and he was Republican. And I'd call him on the phone, and I was so scared because I didn't see right away on the computer that he was Republican. And he's like, Missy, let me tell you. September, huh? Ha ha ha. Well, it's October. And I'm like, oh, here it comes. And he's like, well, I'm 83 years old. So then I'm more of like, oh, God, here it comes. And I'm a Republican. I'm like, shit. I was just waiting to just have to smile over the phone to get through this nightmare of a call. And then this man started telling me about how closely he had been watching to and listening to Joe over the years, and what a good man he was, and just what a good heart he had, and what a great president he believed he could be. And that changed my week, that changed my day, that changed my own heart, to give me hope that here in the deep red areas of North Carolina, I called that guy. Yeah. Who was just a true believer, who had nothing but great things to say about Joe Biden. And then he was recommending like documentaries for me to watch online that I could learn more history about presidencies, like one that was done by this photojournalist over the years and stuff. And it's like really smart, articulate, deep Southern accent, good old boy. There is hope for our world yet. For our country.
It was Joe is not my first choice. I was Elizabeth Warren. Joe is a little more centered than I like, but you know what? he's doing everything that I want him to do right now. And, a year from now, I may be trying to pull him more to the left, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, he's doing everything he can to get this pandemic under control and to get this, and he's doing everything he can to try to heal this nation, especially of its racial problems that we're currently dealing with and the racism that we're having to fight with. The only problem is that right now we have a lot of people in the Congress that were voted in or came in because of 45, and they're still in, or they got voted in because of what they believe. And that is things that we'll have to deal with. And trust me, we're going to talk about one of them in a few moments.
Do you remember who my first choice was?
What?
Do you remember who my first choice was when we were in the primaries?
It wasn't yours, Warren, too?
No.
Who was your first
Julian
one?
Castro.
Real? That's right. Yes, yours
I was playing
Castro.
it pretty close to my vest for most of the primary, but yeah.
I liked Yang, but
Yang
he
too. We're not ready for
no.
Yang.
The more I've heard about him, as he's wanting to run for mayor of New York, and he is just wow, he's bad. He's just I like a couple of his ideas, but he is just bad as a politician. He just needs to step back and offer ideas and not but
Okay.
Warren was always my first pick.
Yeah. So anyway.
You were going to say something that you found particularly interesting in his speech versus all of the other speeches that we had heard.
Oh, well, yeah, that he was saying, well, there were, a couple of things. Talking about the power of our example being our strength rather than making an example of our power. I am hopeful about. His faith, although prevalent and mentioned, and a lot of presidents do use Bible quotes and everything, I think his shows through in more subtle and good ways sometimes. The moment of silence he held is, as far as I understand, unprecedented. And we have lived through so much in this country, but having that moment of silence for people lost to the pandemic, I thought was incredibly profound. And that he used his language about the pandemic wasn't calling it a war like Trump was trying to do, which is weird. But he ended his speech with "protect our troops." All of them always, God bless you, God bless America, God bless us all, God bless blah blah blah. But he also added protect our troops. And even though these other presidents have been through, their administrations have overseen way more war than we're engaged in now. We're kind of, trying to wind down of everything we can without breaking promises. He said that. And I think people forget that he is one of the few presidents in recent years that we've had that has had blood in the game with his family.
Yeah. And that he's also lost a son. He's lost a lot. He knows about loss. Both, he lost his first entire family the day before he was, sworn in as a congressperson. And then he lost his son to cancer. He's lost a lot. And so he knows about loss. If anybody can understand the empathy and understand what a lot of families are going through right now, it's him. And I think that is going to show through all of this. And I think that's why he is so determined to not let this linger any more than it has to. Because
I don't know how. Surviving with the level of empathy that he expresses every day with the things he have been through is profoundly, it shows profound strength. Yeah. And I wish that people would appreciate that, and I wish people that were attacking him would take a deep goddamn breath and walk in his shoes.
For me, above anybody else that we have covered ever, if there is one person that I can point to as a political figure that is walks their faith better than anybody else, it would be Joe Biden, because he shows that empathy and he shows that love of Christ, and he shows what it's like to be in those dark places and to still hold on to his faith. And a lot of people would lose their faith in those kind of situations or be angry at God, you know. And he lost his entire family, his wife and his children, in a horrific car accident. If I'm remembering the story, because it's been a while since I've read his entire biography, but I think that's correct. I know he lost his entire family like days before he was sworn in as a congressperson the first time.
Actually, it was his wife and her 1-year-old daughter
Right.
that died in the accident. But Bo and Hunter, they were born then. Those are her sons.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And they were injured grievously. Well, not grievously. They were injured in the accident. And that was what started him being Amtrak Joe. Is he almost... People talked him out of just dropping and not getting sworn in and not taking office. They talked him out of that. And his compromise was that he would just take the train to D.C. every day and then go back every day to tuck those boys in and raise his sons.
Right. And
then he met Jill, and Jill's awesome. And yeah, it's... Yeah.
and you know, and he lives his faith. He lives his Catholic faith, and that's something that a lot of people can't. You know, a lot of politicians claim that faith, but they don't act it, and he does. So I give him a lot of props for that. So before we do this week's Carrot and Stick, Brother Bowie, will you lead us in a word of prayer?
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us the trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
So our carrot this week,
Yay!
Stacey Abrams is nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize.
She is. And I'm going to be talking about this an awful lot tomorrow.
Okay, on Geek Grills?
Yeah, Geek Grills, barring any further problems, Ray's father is ill with COVID and took a turn yesterday, so we did not have a show yesterday, but we're hopefully having it tomorrow. If we don't have it till next week, it'll probably still be... We're going to talk about Stacey Abrams being nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. So why don't you talk about it here?
I was going to talk about my favorite person to talk about, so why don't you talk about her?
Okay. Well, because I'm going to tomorrow. It's weird. It's weird. All right.
It will be a preview of your show tomorrow. So go and watch Geek Grills tomorrow on their show, which is Twitch TV/Geek Grills. So go and watch their show tomorrow, where they'll go into more detail about this. Here's a preview.
Okay. All right. So Stacey Abrams, the former Georgia gubernatorial candidate, and star voting rights activist, has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Woo! Like, this is how we took Georgia. Democrats out there. We have no doubt. None of us have any doubt. This is how that happened. She ran, basically, the story is, for governor a few years ago, and the horrible, now Governor Brian Kemp was Attorney General there at the time, and basically purged the voting rolls and disenfranchised many, many voters of color. So she just got to work, and she organized with Fair Fight Action, an organization she started, and got everybody, legitimately registered to vote and to the polls since then. So Lars Halbrechen A Socialist Party politician in Norway's parliament announced this on Monday, which was the first day of Black History Month in the U.S. and the last day for someone to be nominated for the prize. And he announced that Abrams' work follows in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s footsteps in the fight for equality before the law and for civil rights. And King won that award in 1964. So
I would. I also find it interesting that if you remember, Barack Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize right after he got elected.
Mm-hmm.
And I just find it interesting that whenever we have a Republican president lately, and then right afterwards we have a Democratic president, that someone on our side is nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. It's like the world is like, oh, we should give one of you something because we thank you for going back to sanity.
Oh my God! Right? Give the xenophobe, give them a cookie so they stop.
And we thought the last one was bad. We better do something quick. Yeah. So the stick
Don't you blaspheme in here. Don't you blaspheme in here.
goes to my favorite person, the person I have made it my lifelong ambition to make sure that legally she will never hold another public office as long as she lives, or it kills me first, whichever comes first. I am speaking about my favorite nut job of the world, and that is the Congresswoman from Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene. So many of you probably already know her. She is the classic woman that will come up to the counter wanting to speak to your manager, and she has become the manager. She's wanting to speak to the manager of the Congress because we've kicked her out of all of her commissions. Of course, she's happy with that because now she gets to talk more, which is going to be great. I get to hear her voice even more.
Such a lunatic. Gracious. And just mean.
Oh,
Evil.
yeah.
I mean, man, she gives Karen's a bad name. Like, chasing a Parkland shooting victim down the street and calling him a coward. Like, I have words for her. Even I'm not going to say it out loud right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that is one of them. She, there's so much. She called for the execution of Nancy Pelosi. She liked a tweet for the execution of Nancy Pelosi. She felt that the leaders of Congress, of the House of Representatives, should be tried and executed on the grounds of treason. She said that in a speech. She claimed she hadn't said any of that stuff, since she was elected to Congress. Well, great. That's only been 3 months, and your lawyer probably told you to shh about that afterwards. But the one that I am calling out, and the one that really got everybody going, maybe we should require anybody running for Congress to maybe take a psychological exam before they get to run for Congress, was the fact that she felt that the California wildfires in 2018 was started by Jewish lasers from outer space. I am not kidding. I am not joking. She actually believed that at one time. She did not say that she didn't believe that when she was on the House floor.
Well, no, she thinks that PG&E, like the Rothschilds, like a famous Jewish family that people are always pointing at in these conspiracies, they're using their solar project satellites to, make space lasers, and citing footage of, fucking lightning coming with starting fires as proof.
Yeah.
And she thinks they did it to, pump up their stock and destroy some rail project. Like, wow. Good. And, she has a whole freaking practical manifesto on this insane theory.
Yeah.
I don't know how to call it theory. It was hard to say. No, bullshit.
I am. I don't know what to say. I remember. Okay, so I'm going back a little bit in my time, and what really got me really, really into activism was we had in our state a senator by the name of Jesse Helms, and he was a racist. But what really set me off and got me on the street working for political action committees for several years was he had made a statement. They were renewing the Ryan White bill, which was funding for pediatric AIDS money. And he had made a statement on the Senate floor as like, well, about how we should not do this because we don't know if, Ryan White was gay or not. And I thought that was the worst thing I'd ever heard in my life. I nearly lost my ever beloved mind. He was a child that got it because he was a hemophiliac, and it was a blood transfer that we, have gotten much better about the testing and stuff. But this was the early days of the AIDS crisis, and he died because of that. But, so I just wanted, so that was what got me all into this politics stuff, was that statement. And I heard it on TV in passing, and I lost my mind. I think I blacked out and I ended up in some other state, with rage. But Marjorie Taylor Greene has made it literally her life's ambition to say the craziest stuff because she believes it. She is a QAnon person to the letter. And there are other people in Congress that are just along with her. She is just the face of that group. And this is something elected. That we're
like. There's a concentration of these people. I'm scared.
You and me both. I feel like that one of those scenes from like a cartoon is like, hold me, I'm scared. As the world is coming to the end or whatever. It's like, yeah, I know. So there's a Q thing, and the Democrats are going to tie the Republican Party to that unless they do something about these individuals like her, like Lauren Boebert.
Yeah, I was glad to see the action taken and her being removed from those committees.
Yeah, especially the Education Committee.
Oh, right.
So, I like, okay, fine. She can be on the Labor Committee because she does work, because her small business, and she does a small business. You know what? Fine. I'm okay with that in some respects. I mean, I understand because of her background. But when they put her on the Education Committee, that's when I was like, nope, she needs to be off all of her committees. Nope. That was the Republicans slapping the Democrats in the face saying, oh, we're just going to do this. And she's a freshman congressman. Not every congressman gets on a committee anyways. So yeah, she definitely deserves that. So yeah, so I'm glad she's off those committees.
Bye.
With that being, yeah, it's just I honestly think it was the Republicans saying, "We're just going to do this and see what you do. You can't do anything." It's like, oh, watch us, and that's what they did. And the thing is, what really scared me is and I want to correct some of the reporting because we have to be fair about this. Some of the reporting said that she got a standing ovation from the GOP Republican Congress people. It was not the entire, coalition of Republicans that gave her a standing ovation. According to the reporting, according to the honest reporting, it was half of the representatives in the House that gave her a standing ovation. So I just want to be clear: not all of them supported that situation. So or gave her a standing.
They're all completely mad. This is your carrot for the Republicans for the day. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to be fair and be like, okay, here's the I wanted to be fair and be like that. So, all right. So next week we're going to do a news thing. With that being said, we have been an hour and a half on this, so this is a long one. I'll try to make the next one shorter. I'm sorry. This is my
Yeah, we
fault.
could have probably done a compare and contrast of two of them, but
Yeah, this is my fault. I overstretched. We will do better next week. So, with that being said, I want to thank you for joining us at Heresy and Hearsay. I am Reverend Barney, and you can follow me on Twitter at SethRothII. You can find the show on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, any podcast catcher. Just look for our website and just go to our website, or you can Google us. Don't forget we have a Patreon page for $2 a month can keep this show going.
And I'm September. You can follow me on Twitch and Twitter at 9of12 and hear me on on the Geek Grills podcast. Thank you for listening today and bless your hearts. End stream.